And welcome back to This Week. Time now to get the views of our media and political experts. Chip Forrester is the chairman of the State Democratic Party and heard daily on 1510 WLAC, syndicated talk show host Steve Gill. Welcome, gentlemen. Nice to see you both. Let's talk a little bit about the debt ceiling. Obviously, that's the big issue in Washington. The president this week criticized the Republicans for not doing their job. The Republicans fired back, saying the president has not provided leadership. We'll get into the details in a minute, but isn't that the kind of back and forth that the rest of the country sees and says this is why Washington's broken?
Well, I think if the president had a reputation as a hard worker, he might be able to make the case, I'm working hard, you aren't. This is a guy who's played 76 rounds of golf, 45 days of vacation, has had all sorts of soirees and events and fundraisers. He's had over 35 fundraisers so far. This is not a guy that when the American people think of him, their default setting is, man, he's a hard worker. So, particularly since the first thing he did after he said, you all need to work hard and stay here, he goes off to a weekend of vacation, getting ready for a couple of weeks of vacation in Martha's Vineyard. So his pitch doesn't sell based on his reputation.
Oh, come on, Steve. He got Osama. He got
did.
Our country,
he was there.
he got our country back on track. I mean, it's been a tough haul.
Wait, you're saying our economy is on track.
No,
you're going to actually make the pitch. We're doing well.
There are more jobs today than when he took over, and the debacle that George Bush created. So we are moving in the right direction with the economy that was in a ditch that George Bush put us in after 8 years fighting 2 wars and the tax breaks for the rich.
I hope y'all will make the case that the economy is doing better. The economy is doing well because 428,000 people last week filed new unemployment claims in 1 week. Y'all make that pitch. I think it'll be a great race.
The Republicans are saying, though, for the first time, Mitt Romney and others are saying, yes, you inherited a mess that was created by George W. Bush, and then the logo of the language is, but you've made it worse. That's the criticism of the president. Getting back to the debt ceiling thing, the president has said he believes there's a framework at least in place that'll get us to that August 2nd deadline or before. Republicans seem to be looking at some of the issues that he talked about if the tax increase doesn't happen. Is that where they're really standing right now?
I think there's just no sense that Obama's serious. I mean, you've got Tim Geithner, his Treasury Secretary, who has said of the budget they put out in January, it's not serious. It will not put us on a path to any kind of balance. They just wanted to toss the ball to the Republicans and criticize them. That's the game they've been playing from the beginning. This president isn't serious. That's why he's up in Camp David this weekend.
The president's asking Congress to do their job. It's not the president leads, but it's Congress's responsibility, and they're not fulfilling that responsibility. The other piece of it that the president's talked about is there's got to be some corporate tax breaks that are taken away that George Bush put in for the rich, and the Republicans refuse to put any of that on the table. We are looking at cuts, and the president has offered those, and the Democrats have offered those, but there's got to be, on the other side of the equation, some kind of increases for those top 2% in our country.
The problem is the president's being disingenuous about these supposed cuts. For example, all this attack on corporate jets, the jet savings from if you tax them all the way to what he wants to do would be $3 billion over 10 years. He spent more than that bombing Libya without congressional authority in the last period of time than would be saved this whole year with the jet subsidy. And keep in mind, he included that jet cut in his stimulus plan. This is his plan, not the Bush plan.
Is Medicare and Medicaid off the table?
Off the table.
Republicans think it's off the table?
I think you've still got to look at the waste, the fraud, and the abuse in Medicare,
No one's
Medicaid,
arguing
and in
about that.
everywhere.
Yeah.
But that means it's not off the table. You've got to look at, are we wasting money, and are there ways to save money by still providing those who've been promised? Our seniors, people above age 55, as the Ryan plan does, still get what they've been promised. But we've got to look beyond that, or nobody's going to have it.
Here in Tennessee, we talked to Steve yesterday about this unique situation is beginning to create itself here in Tennessee with Republican freshman congresspeople. At least 3 look like they may have challengers next year in a primary, which doesn't happen very often, and that does 2 things. It opens up the door for your party, for the Democrats, and it forces the Republicans to have to spend some of their war chest fighting a primary. Very unusual to think it's really going to happen.
Well, so much of it depends on where the lines get drawn.
Redistricting lines.
I think for the Democrats and for Chip, there may be opportunities, except that most of these districts will be more Republican than they were when the Democrats held them. For example, in the 4th District, you've got Scott DeJarlais, who beat Lincoln Davis. If you move Rutherford County into that district, depending on what you do in other areas, you probably make that more Republican. So while it might theoretically create an opportunity for the Democrats, reality is it's still a tougher district for them.
Does it open it up for you, for your party?
Absolutely, and I think the other good thing is what's happened with the Republican legislature in Tennessee, frustration on the part of voters. That gives us a real message in those districts, and then what's happening in Washington. So, and I think it's very much an opportunity for us.
Your thoughts on the governor's plan this week? He announced his entrepreneurship plan, Start Up Tennessee. It's not really a jobs program. He's calling it a jobs program, but it's more of an expansion program. And he has said his focus is going to be on creating new jobs through existing companies rather than really attracting bigger companies, similar to what Governor Bredesen did in the early parts of his administration.
Well, this is just window dressing. He ran on the platform of creating jobs in Tennessee. This entire legislative session, there's been nothing serious that Republicans have focused on in our state in terms of creating jobs. The Vanderbilt poll just came out that showed there's a precipitous 20% drop in the favorability rating of the legislature. The governor knows he's in trouble. The Republicans know they're in trouble. This is just window dressing to try and cover up the abysmal leadership that Republicans and the governor have showed in job creation this last legislative session.
The Vanderbilt poll was extraordinarily poorly constructed. That's an entirely different concept to talk about. But the bottom line is the facts bear out what Governor Haslam is saying. 80% of the job creation in Tennessee comes from existing companies. If you're going to fish in a pond, fish where the fish are. And in Tennessee, the fish are already here. We just need to expand the size of the
But then he cut 65 jobs out of economic and community development, jobs that help small communities do their planning. It makes no sense at all, and that's something that voters need to understand.
In this economy, when Tennessee unemployment is still well above 9%, isn't it difficult and doesn't almost make it impossible for companies to want to expand because they're still in that cutback mode, so new jobs won't be created until the economy gets a little better?
Well, and I think, and I said on this show repeatedly during the campaign, Republicans need to be careful about promising jobs when the national economy is an anchor chain around this country's neck. The only place you've seen any exception in the job creation has been in Texas, which has followed the model that Governor Haslam is wanting to follow, where you get business off our backs, out of our pockets, and out of our way. Half the jobs that have been created in this country since Obama took office have been created in Texas. We need to follow the Texas model, and frankly, the White House needs to do the same thing.
And let's just make sure we understand where that anchor comes from. It comes from George Bush, 8 years of his leadership, 2 wars, and tax breaks for the super wealthy in our country. Our president is moving us out of that and getting rid of that anchor. But
that would be the 4.4% unemployment we had under George Bush, the 7% when Barack Obama took over. It's now 9% with no signs of changing. To blame it on George Bush ignores the role of Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid, who took over several years ago, and that's when the actual recession began, when Obamanomic policies were preceded by Democrat policies.
20 seconds. How do we lower the unemployment rate in Tennessee?
Well, I think you need to create an environment where you bring companies here. Phil Bredesen had a great model. He brought large companies to the state, created economic incentives for them to come here. That's the way to do it.
We have to leave it at that. Steve Gill, Chip Forrester, appreciate your time and your insight. Stay with us as we continues in a moment.